discuss guitar setup in terms of getting the strings at the right heights and installed. And the first thing we want to do is we want to check the neck for straight. We're going to use a notch straight edge, and to begin with we want to check the neck for straight so that we can check the frets to make sure they're the same height. If they're not all the same height, the notes won't all play. So I'm going to set this on here and have the notches clear each of the frets so I can read the true status of the fretboard surface. And as I look at this, it's very close. It's just a little bit high in the middle. So what I will do, looking this direction, I will turn the adjuster counterclockwise slightly. And I only recommend going a tenth or an eighth of a turn, especially for the small amount that this needs to be adjusted. If the neck is not straight, you can't hope to get all the frets established at the same height. This looks really good. So now what I'm going to do is use this fret rocker to check 3 frets at a time. You don't want to use 2 and you don't want to use 4 because that's not going to give you a true indication if you've got a high fret or a low fret. This fret rocker, each surface is a different length, and the idea is that the longer surfaces can span the lower frets that are further apart, and the shorter surface can span the frets that are closer together. And I'm just going to go through and check to see, and you want to make sure you rock it from end to end, not side to side. So we're going to rock it end to end, and if you hear a clicking or you feel a little bit of vibration, it's an indication that one of the frets is not the same height as all the rest. And as I check this, there are a couple of places where I can feel a little bit of rocking or clicking. If everything seems like it's in good shape down the center, you also want to check at the sides at the treble and the bass sides, because it's possible that it could be good in one place along the frets and be off somewhere else. So the first thing that I see is that the second fret here rocks a little bit. I think the second fret may be a little bit high, and there's a bit of a gap under the third fret, so I'm pretty comfortable that this fret's high. What I'm going to do is use the plastic face on this hammer to tap this fret in. It's likely that this is not completely seated from the fret pressing operation. After a few taps, you can go back and check it again. And mostly good. It's a little bit high here. I didn't tap it here, so I'm going to tap it on the bass side. Check it again. Much better. Seems like it's a little higher. It's common for some of the frets to not be fully seated along the treble or bass sides at the edge of the fretboard. Easy to put the hammer down and forget which fret you were going to work on in the process of looking away and looking back, so I try to hold my finger next to the fret that I intend to pay some attention to, so I don't look away and lose track and forget.
Make sure you don't hit your finger with the hammer.
Oh. Double check something down this way. Try to support the neck in the vicinity where you're going to do the fret persuasion, so that the knife is supported.
Are there any times that the frets may recoil, where you tap them, they get pressed in, but then they recoil back out? Where they may not be holding in the slot?
Maybe if they were. Have you encountered that?
Yeah, if the slot is a little bit too wide at times, sometimes you need to put a drop of super glue to hold the fret in place. We've seen some recoil frets at times also, just so it gets held in place on the edges, and it's typically right on the edges are where that issue would occur.
This one might be a little bit low.
Is that a normal amount of adjustment?
Yeah, very, very much so. Yeah. We're in pretty good shape here as far as having the frets about the same height. The next step is going to be to fit a string nut into the slot here, and then we can look at roughing in. So this is the string nut, and chances are, out of the package, it's going to be too wide to fit into the slot, either in variations in the way the slot's cut, more likely just the manufacturing process leaves a burr on each of the base corners. And so to get this to fit, we're not going to modify the fretboard under any circumstances. We're going to modify the string nut. And I'm going to just sand it thinner, sanding one side, flip it over, and sand the other side. And for a small part like this, any of your small parts you're going to work with, best to move the part and have a large piece of sandpaper that's stationary, and you pass the small part over. We've sanded it a little bit, and we're going to check and see how it fits, and it's still too wide. And turn it around on the same side, and then I'm going to flip it over and turn it around and go both ways, because I want to avoid sanding a taper into it in case some of my fingers are pushing harder. Okay, so that's where it fits. You may have a little bit of finish or a little bit of sealer in your nut slot. You may have sanded so much wood off of your fretboard that your slot has become very shallow. There is a file that can be used to clean up the bottom of the nut slot. The nut slot now, the nut fits in the slot. We've made it narrower so that it fits. At this point, we want to clean out any finish or sealer that may be in the bottom of the slot and prevent that from sitting nice and snug directly on bare wood. And so there's this file that is smooth on its broad faces, but the narrow edge has cutting teeth. One is coarser and one is fine, and that's for removing material from the bottom of the slot. Under no circumstances do we want to make the slot wider. We only want to clean it out, and if the slot is too shallow from a lot of sanding with the radius beam, we may need to make the slot a little bit deeper. You need to be very careful with this file to make sure that you are keeping the surface flat, that you're not rocking and changing the angle, because the entire flat surface on the bottom of the string nut needs to be supported by wood beneath it for good tone transfer and proper string vibration. This slot was a little shallow, and I am going to remove a little bit of material. This file is intentionally, although it's marked for 1/8 of an inch, this file is intentionally about a 1/64 of an inch narrower so that it doesn't bind. If it were to bind, it might break a piece off of the narrow end of the fretboard. So I am going to push one side against the extreme edge of the fretboard and take a couple passes. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring it over to this side of the fretboard and then make a couple passes. And I want to inspect and make sure that both of my passes are even and that I haven't created a step one way or the other on both sides. It looks pretty good. If I need to go more lightly, I can use the fine cut teeth on the other side of the file. And I'm pressing down on the top of the file to make sure that it stays flat and follows the existing surface of the bottom of the nut slot.
And you're essentially cleaning that slot out,
Just cleaning the nut slot out. Yes.
not making it deeper.
So the height of that looks pretty good. It
What
sits
should
in
the
there.
height of it be?
It's gonna. You cannot tell for sure until you have the string.
13 or 11.
We might be able to throw some numbers out, but it doesn't look like you need to see it with the strings. So it may need
Because
to
every
shift.
gauge's string will be different.
Okay. At this point, we have the frets have been rocked, and we're reasonably confident that they are all the same height at this point. We've got the nut slot prepared. The string nut itself has been made narrower so that it will fit. The next thing we want to do prior to putting the strings on is we want to just make a approximation of where these saddles need to be to make it easier to do the final intonation. So what we'll do is we will measure from the 12th fret with a small E saddle 12 3/4 inches.
Does it matter which side of the fret that you're measuring from? You're just going to go in the center of the fret to the...
So when we measure, we're going to go from the very center of the saddle where the string makes contact with the saddle and departs for the nut. We're going to measure to the center of the 12th fret.
Basically crown to crown.
Because the metal end of the tape measure is going to move, and that's enough to be fairly inaccurate, I'm actually going to measure from the 1-inch mark and go to 13 3/4. Very, very close. To adjust the saddles to shorten that distance to the 12th fret, I would turn this counterclockwise with a small Phillips screwdriver. And the spring in here, as I turn this counterclockwise, will push the saddle forward a little bit. And I can recheck. From the 1-inch mark to 13 3/4. And this is not the final measurement. We just want to get close. And that seems like that's going to be pretty good. With that established, from 13 3/4 to the 1-inch mark, I'm going to simply eyeball and approximate the position of the other saddles. It's been suggested that the stagger on these first 3 saddles needs to be somewhere in the order of a 32nd of an inch. And again, I am not going to measure that. I am simply going to make an approximation. These 2 saddles are string 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So for 1, 2, 3, and 5 should be about the same distance to the 12th fret. String number 2 is going to have a bit more offset to it than these 3 saddles here. And then finally, string number 1 finally string number 6 is going to be staggered back quite a bit more. Let's do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So string 2 and string 4 should be about the same distance from the 12th fret. String 5 is going to be set back from string 4 a little bit more dramatically, a little bit more distance than these first 3 were. And then finally string 6 is going to be set back from string 5 quite a bit, because this takes into account the diameter of the larger strings. Not measuring anything else other than simply the first string to the 12th fret at 12 3/4, or from the 1-inch mark to 13 3/4. At this point, I'm ready to install some strings. The strings come packaged in a coil. In many cases, so you need to carefully uncoil them, and at this point you don't want to put a kink in any of them. It's going to interfere with how the string plays. It can shorten the life of the string and lead to a breakage. at least one manufacturer that color codes the ends of the string so that you can be sure visually which size string goes where simply by the color on the end of it, but that's not the case for all manufacturers. So you want to lay the 6 strings out and sort them visually by their size before you get started.
Diodario strings.
In
Have the
videos,
color
we try
ends.
to avoid mentioning name brand.
Oh, yeah.
We are filming. Separated first. My string knot is a little bit loose, so until I have the first couple of strings on, I have to pay attention not to lose that or have that fall out. I'm going to start with the smallest string. I usually do the smallest string with students, do that for them individually so they get one-on-one instruction and with the string that they're most likely to break to make sure that it goes on properly without breakage. In some cases I'll also do a second string just to reinforce, and then the larger strings let them take over. The ferrules that you installed in the back of the guitar, you're going to insert the string through the hole. It's going to come through the face of the guitar and up through the hole in the bridge, and it should go through the middle of each of the saddles as you do each string. I commonly put all 6 strings through and lay the others that I'm not using back off to the other side, but for this demonstration to get started I'm just going to do the first string by itself. This is a string peg winder, tuning machine winder, and you can use this to turn the machines and tune it very quickly. It takes a long time to turn one at a time. I find it beneficial to get it set up so that all of the pegs are oriented this way and all of the holes line up in a straight line towards the bridge. It makes it easier to turn the knobs and not bump the other pegs, and it makes it easy to line the strings up and get the strings installed more quickly. So I'm going to take a moment to get that established just to make this whole process go a little more easily for me. There are a number of different techniques for winding the strings around the posts. Some folks will have their preferences, but an easy way to do this is to wind them so that each wrap or each turn around the post goes downward closer to the peg head. To get this set up, I need to have extra string to wrap around the post. If I simply pull this through taut and begin to wind this with the string winder, I have no extra slack. I have no extra length wrapped around the post. The string will kink at the post, and it won't be long before it breaks, especially with the small strings. I won't even get it tuned to pitch. The bigger ones will last for a while, but you won't be able to keep them in tune. They'll be constantly going out of tune. So we need some extra length to be able to wrap around the post. I like to pull it through taut, and then I'll pinch right up against the tuner and back up a certain amount, and that extra amount that I back up from here to here is my extra length that gets wrapped around the post. So for instance, with the small E string, I want to have more string wrapped around it for tuning stability, so I may back up all the way in the vicinity of like the A string, like this. So this portion here is extra, and you can see the slack now bunching up above the fretboard. When I begin to wind this and wrap this, my attention needs to be 100% focused on wrapping this string. I can't be distracted by other things or leave this and let go and do other things. I have to keep tension on this the whole time, or else it'll turn into like a bird's nest, and it's like a coil spring. It just kind of goes crazy. So I'm holding this. The first couple of turns now have the hole oriented instead of parallel to the string length, perpendicular. And this is the one time where we're going to kink the string. We're going to press this up against the tuning post, and the excess we're going to put a second kink and point that straight up towards the ceiling to get that excess so it's not turning around and around and whipping our hands with every rotation. With that held, I'm going to continue to turn. Now I've gone about a half of a revolution with that post. Go a little bit more. Now I'm about 3/4 of a revolution with that post. And this is where I want to take up the excess slack, and I will use my index finger and my pinky and the whole width of my finger spread on my hand to raise this up on an angle and to put tension on this, and I'm using my index finger, or sometimes cases my thumb, to keep this portion nearly parallel to the fretboard, and this part here encourages each wrap to continue down the post. So here I go. This is the part where you can't let go, you can't go do other things.
You wrap
have
them
to be-
counterclockwise. I notice it's going counterclockwise. Is that the...
As you look down on it, this is going to go counterclockwise, and the string comes off this treble side of
Okay.
each post.
Yeah, you're always winding it.
All right.
The 3-in-3 headstock, these three will turn this way and the other three will turn the other way because the string is coming off the other side of the post. And on a 3-in-3, you just want all these three to be on the inside of the headstock and the other three on the inside of the headstock. As I'm progressing, each of these wraps successively goes adjacent to the prior. They're all parallel, they're all snug, there's no gaps. If I were to let go right now, this wire's been deformed, it'll be in a curve, but it won't conform to this. It'll open up to probably 4 times the diameter. I won't be able to rewrap this. In the meantime, the slack that I had, where my hand was up really high, now I'm dropping a lot lower. I want to set that in the slot. I want to tune that, and I want to tighten it just to the point where it will make a tone. It doesn't have to be the proper pitch, just to where it will make a tone. And I need to leave it be. It's not nearly tensioned enough, but that's fine for my purposes.